Abandoned by her fiancé, the pregnant woman with triplets is rescued by his millionaire brother, who hides a secret about the baby's true paternity. Amanda Mason stared at the positive pregnancy test in her trembling hands, sitting on the cold floor of the bathroom in her Boston home. It wasn't just one test, there were 5, all lined up on the edge of the sink, each confirming what her body had been signaling for weeks. At 28, her life was about to change dramatically, but she still didn't know how much. Richard Bennett, her fiancé of 3 years, was traveling on business in Chicago when she discovered her pregnancy. A successful executive in a technology company, Richard had always been methodical and calculating in everything, including the family planning they had discussed extensively. The unplanned pregnancy certainly didn't fit into his meticulously organized plans. With her hands still trembling, Amanda picked up the phone. The screen showed 3 missed calls from her medical clinic. She had taken blood tests the day before, but hadn't expected such a quick response. Her heart raced when she returned the call. "Ms. Mason?" Dr. Reynolds' voice sounded both professional and gentle. "We need you to come to the clinic today. Your results? Well, there's something we need to discuss in person." 2 hours later, Amanda was sitting in Dr. Reynolds' office, her hands nervously clutching the bag in her lap. The doctor's words seemed to echo in her mind like a distant dream. "Triplets? You're expecting triplets?" The world seemed to spin around her. 1 baby would already be a significant change, but 3? How would she tell Richard? How would they manage this situation? Amanda? Dr. Reynolds' voice brought her back to reality. "I know it's a lot of information to process, but we need to start prenatal care immediately. Multiple pregnancies require special care." That evening, in her apartment, Amanda rehearsed various ways of breaking the news to Richard. She decided to wait for his return from Chicago, which was scheduled for the following day. Some news needed to be delivered in person, but fate had other plans. Richard called late at night, his voice distant and formal. "Amanda, we need to talk. I'm not going back to Boston tomorrow." The tone of his voice made Amanda's blood run cold. "What do you mean you're not coming back? What happened?" "I met someone." The words fell like stones into her stomach. "Miranda works in the Chicago office. We got closer over the last few months." "I'm sorry, Amanda, but I can't continue with our engagement." Amanda's world fell apart in a matter of seconds. Richard's next words sounded distant, as if they were coming from a tunnel. Empty explanations, rehearsed apologies, promises that it would be better this way. When the call ended, Amanda remained motionless on the sofa, one hand on her still flat belly, where 3 lives were beginning to form. Tears ran silently down her face as the reality of her situation hit her. She was alone, pregnant with triplets, and abandoned by the man who had promised to spend his life by her side. The sound of the doorbell startled her. It was almost 11 p.m. when she opened the door and found Alexander Bennett, Richard's older brother, standing on the threshold. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with piercing green eyes, Alex had always been the opposite of his brother, where Richard was calculating and cold. Alex was warm and intuitive. "I've just spoken to Richard," he said, his deep voice laden with concern. "May I come in?" Amanda nodded, making way for her brother-in-law, ex-brother-in-law. She mentally corrected herself. Alex was known in Boston as one of the most successful businessmen in the real estate sector, but at that moment, he just seemed like a genuinely worried man. "He's an idiot," Alex declared, taking a seat on the sofa. "I came to see how you were." Amanda sat in the opposite armchair, feeling the weight of the secrets she was carrying. Alex had always been a close friend, someone she trusted. Now, looking at him, something in his gaze made her hesitate. "There's something you're not telling me," said Alex, leaning forward. His green eyes, so different from Richard's blue ones, seemed to see right through her. It was then that Amanda began to cry, the emotions of the day finally overflowing. Between sobs, she told him about her pregnancy, about the triplets, about her fear of the future. Alex got up and knelt beside her, holding her hands. "You're not alone, Amanda. I won't let you go through this alone." There was something in his gaze, an intensity that Amanda couldn't quite decipher. What she didn't know was that Alex carried his own secret, something that would completely change the course of their lives. "I will take care of you and these children," he promised, his voice firm and determined. No matter what happens. At that moment, as the clock ticked down to a new day, Amanda couldn't have imagined how that promise would transform her life, nor the secrets that Alex kept so carefully. Fate had intertwined their lives in a way that neither of them could have foreseen, and that night was just the beginning of a journey that would test the limits of love, loyalty, and truth. The morning after Richard's devastating announcement, Amanda woke up on her sofa, still dressed in her clothes from the day before. A blanket that she didn't remember picking up covered her, certainly the work of Alex, who had insisted on staying until she calmed down. Her phone showed several missed calls from Richard, but no messages. The Boston sun was streaming through the windows of the apartment when Alex returned, carrying breakfast bags and a determined expression that Amanda was getting to know well. He had left quietly in the early hours of the morning, after she had finally fallen asleep. "You need to eat properly," he said, placing the bags on the kitchen table. "Now there are 4 people to look after." Amanda watched as Alex methodically arranged bagels, fruit, and juice on the table. There was something different about his demeanor and underlying tension that she couldn't quite decipher. "Alex, you don't have to do this," she muttered, taking a seat at the table. "I don't want to be a burden to you either." He stopped what he was doing and stared at her intensely. "You've never been a burden, Amanda. You never will be." There was a conviction in his voice that made her shudder. "There's something I need to tell you," he continued, taking a seat opposite her. "But first, we need to resolve some practical issues. Your pregnancy is high risk, and you're going to need all the support you can get." The next few hours were filled with calls and planning. Alex, with his management experience and contacts, managed to schedule appointments with the best multiple pregnancy specialists in Boston. His efficiency was impressive, but Amanda noticed moments when he seemed lost in thought, as if he were carrying an invisible weight. "There's something I've been thinking about," Alex said over lunch. "My house on Beacon Hill has plenty of space, and it's close to the best hospitals in the city. I want you to move there." Amanda almost choked on her juice. "Alex, it's not charity," he interrupted, his green eyes fixed on her. "It's what's right, what's necessary." Before Amanda could reply, her phone rang. It was Richard. Alex immediately tensed, his fingers lightly gripping the edge of the table. "You don't have to answer it," he said, his voice controlled, but Amanda knew she had to face it. With trembling hands, she picked up the call on the speakerphone. "Amanda," Richard's voice sounded distant and formal. "We need to sort out the practicalities of the apartment and, how could you?" Amanda's voice shook. "How could you do this to me?" "I've already said I'm sorry," Richard interrupted, his voice cold, "but it's for the best. Miranda and I—" Alex stood up abruptly, his eyes blazing with anger. Amanda had never seen him like this. "Richard," Alex said, his voice as sharp as ice, "you have no idea what you're abandoning." There was a moment of tense silence on the other end of the line. "Alex, what are you doing there?" "Being the man you never were," replied Alex. "Amanda's pregnant, Richard, with triplets." The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda could hear Richard's ragged breathing on the other end of the line. I didn't know," stammered Richard. "Now you do," Alex cut in. "And you know what's even more interesting? You've just demonstrated exactly why you don't deserve to be part of this family." Alex hung up the phone before Richard could reply. Amanda stared at him, surprised by his protective reaction. "I'm sorry," he muttered, running his hands through his hair in a nervous gesture. "I shouldn't have interfered like that." Amanda reached her hand across the table. "Thank you for being here." Alex entwined his fingers in hers, and for a moment, Amanda felt something different in the air between them. There was an intimacy, a connection that went beyond the comfort of friends. "There's something I need to tell you," Alex finally said, his voice low and intense. "Something about the night Richard went to Chicago for the first time." The sound of the doorbell interrupted his confession. It was Dr. Reynolds, whom Alex had called for a home consultation. During the examination, Amanda couldn't stop thinking about what Alex was about to reveal. There was a growing anxiety in her chest, a feeling that something important was about to change in her life. "The babies are fine," confirmed Dr. Reynolds, "but you need rest and constant monitoring. Triplet pregnancies are complex." After the doctor left, Amanda found Alex on the balcony. gazing thoughtfully at the Boston skyline. "What were you going to tell me?" she asked softly. Alex turned to her, his green eyes charged with emotion. "It's not the right time yet," he replied after a pause. "But I promise I'll tell you everything. For now, let me take care of you and the children." Amanda nodded, sensing that there was something bigger at stake, something that would completely change her understanding of the last few months. As she watched Alex walk back into the apartment, she couldn't imagine that the secret he was carrying was about to transform not only their lives, but also the true story behind her pregnancy. A week had passed since the revelation of her pregnancy, and Amanda was already settled into Alex's mansion on Beacon Hill. The move had happened quickly, almost like a blur in her memory. Alex had coordinated everything with his usual efficiency, from packing her belongings to terminating the lease on her old apartment. The house was impressive, a historic 3-story mansion overlooking Boston Common. Amanda now occupied a spacious suite on the second floor, decorated in soft shades of blue and beige. Alex had insisted on turning the adjoining room into a nursery, although she protested that it was too soon. That particular morning, Amanda woke up to the soft sound of rain against the windows. As she watched the drops trickle down the glass, her hand unconsciously rested on her still imperceptible belly. The reality of carrying 3 lives inside her still seemed surreal. "Good morning," Alex's voice surprised her at the door. He was holding a breakfast tray, something that had become a daily routine. "How are you for today?" "Alex, you need to stop spoiling me like this," Amanda replied. But an involuntary smile appeared on her lips. "You have a company to run, and I have a family to look after," he retorted, placing the tray on the side table. There was something in his eyes when he said "family" that made Amanda's heart race. Amanda's phone vibrated. It was a message from Richard. Since revealing her pregnancy, he had tried to contact her several times, always with vague messages about talking and working things out. She hadn't replied to any of them. Alex noticed her expression change. "Him again?" "Yes," sighed Amanda. "Now that he knows about the babies, he seems to have developed a conscience." Alex sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clenched into fists. "Amanda, there's something you need to know." His voice was tense, charged with an emotion she rarely saw in him. "About the night before Richard left for Chicago." The sound of the doorbell interrupted the moment again. Alex closed his eyes in frustration. "You must be Dr. Reynolds for your weekly checkup." But it wasn't the doctor. When Amanda came downstairs, she found Richard standing in the foyer, drenched by the rain and with a determined expression on his face. "What are you doing here?" Alex's voice sounded like ice behind her. "I've come to see Amanda," Richard replied, his blue eyes fixed on her. "We need to talk about the babies. About us." "There is no more us, Richard," said Amanda, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "You made that very clear when you chose Miranda." "Things have changed," Richard insisted. "They're my children too." It was then that something strange happened. Alex took a step forward, his body tense like a rope about to snap. "Are you sure about this, Richard?" The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda looked between the two brothers, sensing that she was missing something crucial. "What are you talking about?" asked Richard. But there was a tremor in his voice that betrayed his nervousness. "Do you remember the farewell party before your first trip to Chicago?" Alex's voice was low, controlled. "When you drank too much and went home early?" Amanda felt her heart race. That night was hazy in her memory. She had drunk more than usual, trying to calm her anxiety about Richard's first long trip. "Alex," Richard seemed to have lost all color. "No. Amanda doesn't remember," Alex continued, his voice now shaking with emotion. "But I remember everything. How I found her crying in the bar after you left. How I took her home. How one thing led to another." The world seemed to stop spinning. Amanda felt her legs go weak. Fragmented memories of that night beginning to emerge, the gentle touch of different hands, kisses that carried a passion Richard had never shown, green eyes instead of blue. "You," she whispered, looking at Alex. Yes," replied Alex, his voice now softer. "And I've been carrying this secret ever since. When I found out about the pregnancy, when Richard abandoned you, I knew I needed to be here, because there's a great possibility that these babies are yours," Amanda added. her hand instinctively going to her belly. Richard staggered backwards, as if he'd been punched. "That's impossible. You couldn't." "Why not?" challenged Alex. "Because you've always been the perfect son? Because you always got everything you wanted?" "Well, not this time, Richard. This time, you've thrown away the best thing that could have happened in your life." Amanda watched the scene unfold as if she were in a dream. So many things were starting to make sense: Alex's excessive concern, his protective behavior, the meaningful glances. "I need you two to leave," she finally said, her voice trembling. "Now." "Amanda." They both began in unison. "No," she held up her hand. "I need to process this alone." As she watched the two Bennett brothers leave the house, Amanda felt the weight of all the truths revealed pressing down on her chest. In a matter of weeks, her life had been turned completely upside down, and now, with this new revelation, she wondered if it would ever make sense again. Climbing the stairs back to her room, Amanda stopped in front of the mirror, her hands resting on her belly. 3 lives were growing inside her, and now the question of her origins added a new layer of complexity to her already complicated situation. What she didn't know was that this revelation was just the beginning of a series of events that would transform not only her life, but that of everyone around her. The week following the bombshell revelation was a whirlwind of emotions for Amanda. Isolated in the bedroom of the mansion on Beacon Hill, she oscillated between moments of absolute clarity and total confusion. The memories of that night, previously hazy, began to emerge in increasingly clear fragments. She remembered the bar now, the tears shed as Richard left early, claiming a headache. She remembered Alex's green eyes, worried and intense, as he sat next to her. The rest was still an incomplete mosaic of sensations. The cab, the fine rain, gentle hands guiding her to her apartment. A kiss that began as a consolation and turned into something deeper. "Miss Mason?" The voice of the housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, brought her back to the present. "Mr. Bennett, Alex left some more bags of food and vitamins. Would you like me to bring them?" Amanda sighed, settling into the armchair by the window. "You can leave them in the hallway, Mrs. Chen. Thank you." For the last 7 days, Alex had respected her request for space, communicating only through Mrs. Chun and the doctors he kept sending to monitor her. Richard, on the other hand, alternated between insistent calls and long periods of silence. That particular afternoon, as the rain began to fall on Boston again, Amanda decided it was time to face the situation. She picked up her phone and, for the first time in days, replied to one of Alex's messages. "Can we talk?" The reply was almost immediate. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. When Alex arrived, he was drenched by the rain, his dark hair sticking to his forehead. There was something vulnerable in his normally confident posture that made Amanda's heart squeeze. "Before anything else," he began, still standing in the bedroom doorway, "I need you to know that I never planned for that night to happen, and I never wanted to hurt you." Amanda indicated the armchair opposite his. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Alex sat down, running his hands over his face in a familiar gesture of frustration. "At first, because you didn't remember clearly. Then, because you and Richard seemed happy, and I didn't want to destroy that. But you remembered everything?" "Every moment," he admitted, his voice low and intense. "Every word, every touch. It was the most important night of my life, Amanda, and also the most torturous, because the next day, when I realized that you didn't remember completely, I understood that I had to keep it with me." Amanda closed her eyes, letting more memories emerge. "You said you loved me," she murmured. "That night, while it was raining, you whispered that you'd always loved me." Alex held his breath. "Do you remember?" "I do now, more and more." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "Why have you stayed by my side all these years, watching me get closer and closer to your brother?" "Because your happiness has always been more important than mine," he replied simply. "And Richard? He always got everything he wanted in life. I thought that maybe, this time, he would do the right thing. But he didn't." "No, he didn't." Alex leaned forward. "And when I found out about the pregnancy, when he abandoned you, I couldn't let you go through it alone, especially knowing that there's a possibility of you being the father Amanda added, her hands instinctively going to her belly. How do we know? We can do a prenatal paternity test, explained Alex. It's safe for babies. But Amanda, I need you to know. Regardless of the result, I want to be there. I want to take care of you and these children. Amanda studied his face, seeing the sincerity in his green eyes. Why? Because I love you, he replied, his voice breaking. I always have. That night wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was the only time I could be truthful about my feelings. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of the rain against the windows. Amanda felt her heart beating out of rhythm, memories and feelings mixing together in a confusing whirlwind. I need time, she finally said, to process all this, to understand how I feel. Alex nodded, standing up. I'll be here when you're ready. I'll always be here. Before he could leave, Amanda called out to him, Alex? He stopped, turning around. He stopped, turning around. That night, it was important to me too, even if I didn't realize it at the time. A small smile appeared on his lips, the first in days. Thank you for telling me that. After Alex left, Amanda remained in the armchair, watching the rain. Her hand gently caressed her belly as she thought about how her life had changed so drastically in such a short space of time. 3 babies were growing inside her, and now there were 2 possibilities about their origins, 2 such different siblings, 2 different paths for their future. Her phone vibrated with a message from Richard. We need to sort this out. I'm the father of these children. Amanda looked at the message for a long moment before replying, Maybe you're not, Richard, and maybe this isn't the worst thing that could happen. As night fell over Boston, Amanda began to realize that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as chaos. And maybe, just maybe, the universe knew exactly what it was doing when it shuffled the cards of her fate so drastically. News of the possible paternity of the triplets spread quickly through the Bennett family. In less than a week, the matriarch of the family, Eleanor Bennett, arrived from New York, determined to put the house in order, as she herself declared on landing at Boston Airport. Amanda watched from the window of her bedroom in the Beacon Hill mansion as the driver helped Eleanor out of the car. Even at 65, the woman emanated an aura of authority that made everyone around her instinctively straighten up. Mrs. Bennett has arrived, announced Mrs. Chen unnecessarily from the bedroom door. She's asking for you. Amanda took a deep breath, adjusting the loose dress she was now wearing to accommodate her belly, which was beginning to show signs of pregnancy. Tell her I'll be down in a moment. As she descended the stairs, Amanda could hear Eleanor's authoritative voice echoing through the lobby. Where are my children? Alex? Richard? Richard's in Chicago, Mom. Alex's voice sounded tired. And I was in a meeting when you called to say you were coming. Chicago. Eleanor snorted. That place where he met that. What's her name again? Miranda, replied Alex, just as Amanda reached the foot of the stairs. Eleanor turned around immediately. Ah, Amanda, darling. Her tone changed completely, becoming almost motherly. Come here, let me look at you. Amanda moved closer, allowing the Bennett matriarch to examine her with critical eyes. How are you feeling, my dear? 3 babies. What an extraordinary blessing. I'm fine, Mrs. Bennett. Eleanor, please. After all, you're carrying my grandchildren. She paused meaningfully. Or at least some of them. Alex stepped forward. Mother, don't mother me, Alexander. Eleanor cut in. You two have turned our family into an episode of a Mexican soap opera. Now, let's all go into the living room. We have a lot to discuss. In the elegant living room, with its tall windows and period furniture, Eleanor Bennett commanded the scene like a general preparing war strategies. Mrs. Chen served tea in fine china cups, while a tense silence hung in the air. First, Eleanor began. We need to resolve the paternity issue. Have you scheduled the test yet? It's scheduled for next week, replied Alex. It's a non-invasive procedure, completely safe for babies. Excellent. Eleanor took a sip of tea. What about Richard? Does he know you're coming? He has a right to be there, Amanda said softly, but I don't know if he'll come. Oh, he'll come, Eleanor assured her with a sharp smile. I may not have been the best mother in the world, but I still know how to make my children obey me. Alex wiped his hands across his face, a gesture Amanda already recognized as a sign of frustration. Mom, this isn't a business meeting that you can just manage. No? Eleanor arched a perfectly drawn eyebrow. 3 lives are at stake here, Alexander. My grandchildren, and regardless of who the father is, these children are Bennett. We need to make sure they get everything they deserve. They will, assured Amanda, surprising everyone with the firmness in her voice. Regardless of the test results, regardless of money or surname, these children will have love and care. Eleanor studied Amanda for a long moment, something softening in her gaze. You know, when Richard first brought you to meet us, I thought he'd finally done something right in life. But maybe, she cast a meaningful glance at Alex, maybe you were always destined for another Bennett. Amanda's phone vibrated. It was a message from Richard. I'll be in Boston for the test. We need to talk first. Richard's coming, she announced, showing him the message. Good, declared Eleanor, placing her cup of tea on the table. Now for the practical arrangements. Alex, that room on the 3rd floor needs to be turned into a nursery suitable for triplets. And Amanda, dear, we need to discuss your maternity leave and future plans. Mrs. Bennett, Eleanor, Amanda corrected herself. I appreciate your concern, but it's not concern, it's practicality, interrupted Eleanor. 3 babies require organization, structure, and regardless of which of my children is the father, your family now. Alex, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. Amanda needs space to process all this, Mom. We can't just overwhelm her feelings with plans and decisions. Eleanor watched her eldest son with a piercing gaze. You really love her, don't you? The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda felt her heart race as Alex, after a moment's hesitation, answered simply, yes. Well, Eleanor stood up, smoothing her impeccable dress. At least one of my children has inherited my common sense. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to make some calls. Has Mrs. Chun prepared my old room yet? After Eleanor left, Amanda and Alex remained silent for a few moments, processing everything that had happened. I'm sorry about her, muttered Alex. No need to apologize, Amanda replied, a small smile appearing on her lips. She's just trying to help in her own way. In her way, yes, agreed Alex, laughing softly. But about what she said, about you loving me? Amanda added, her heart beating harder. Yes. Alex stared at her with those intense green eyes. Every word is true, Amanda. Regardless of the test results, regardless of anything, Amanda felt tears forming in her eyes. I know. And for the first time since this whole situation began, she realized that maybe, just maybe, her heart already knew the answer long before her mind accepted it. The week of the paternity test came faster than Amanda had expected. The Boston autumn painted the trees on Beacon Hill in shades of red and gold, creating a surreal backdrop for what promised to be one of the most important days of her life. On the morning of the procedure, Amanda woke up before sunrise, her hands instinctively protecting her belly, which was now showing more obvious signs of pregnancy. At 4 months, the triplets were making their presence increasingly felt, not only in her changing body, but also in her daily routine. The cars are ready, announced Mrs. Chen, entering the room with a breakfast tray. Mr. Alex is waiting in the library, and Mr. Richard has just arrived. Amanda felt her stomach turn, and it wasn't just because of her pregnancy. Is Richard already here? Yes, and Mrs. Eleanor is keeping him busy in the living room. The distant sound of Eleanor Bennett's authoritative voice echoed through the halls of the mansion, occasionally punctuated by Richard's defensive responses. Amanda could picture the scene. Eleanor in her favorite armchair, interrogating her youngest son about his life choices. Going downstairs, Amanda found Alex in the library, as Mrs. Chun had said. He was standing by the window, his reflection in the glass revealing a tense expression he rarely showed. Good morning, she said softly. Alex turned, and his face softened at the sight of her. How are you feeling? Nervous, Amanda admitted. Scared, anxious, basically every possible emotion at the same time. That makes 2 of us, he replied, taking a few steps towards her. Amanda, regardless of the outcome, I know, she interrupted gently, putting a hand on his arm. You've already made that clear several times. The moment was interrupted by Richard's abrupt entrance, closely followed by a visibly irritated Eleanor. "Amanda," said Richard, completely ignoring his brother, "can we talk in private before we go?" "There's nothing to talk about in private," replied Amanda, surprising everyone with her firmness. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of everyone." Richard looked momentarily disconcerted. "Miranda and I have broken up," he finally announced. "I realize I've made a terrible mistake. If these babies are mine—" "If they're yours," interrupted Eleanor, her voice sharp. "And if they're not, are you going to abandon them again, like you did Amanda?" "Mom, please," Alex intervened, although his own voice betrayed tension. "No, Alex," Amanda spoke up. "Your mother is right. Richard, you can't just appear and disappear from these children's lives based on DNA results. They deserve more than that. I deserve more than that." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard seemed to have aged years in a matter of seconds, his normally confident posture completely shattered. "The car is waiting," announced Mrs. Chen from the doorway, breaking the tense moment. The drive to the clinic was made in 2 separate cars, Amanda and Alex in one, Richard and Eleanor in the other. Along the way, Amanda watched the city awaken, its streets coming to life with the first rays of sunshine. "Penny for your thoughts," murmured Alex, his eyes fixed on her. "I'm thinking about how unpredictable life is," she replied. "6 months ago, I had a completely different life planned out. And now I realize that maybe that life was never really what I wanted." She turned to face him. "Alex, I need to tell you something before the test." The car stopped at a red light, and Alex turned his full attention to her. "What is it?" "Regardless of the outcome, you've become more important to me and these children than Richard ever was." She paused, gathering her courage. "And I think I'm falling in love with you." The light turned green, but Alex remained motionless, his green eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Amanda," his voice was hoarse with emotion, "you have no idea how long I've waited to hear something like this." The moment was interrupted by their arrival at the clinic, where Richard and Eleanor were already waiting for them. Dr. Reynolds greeted them personally, her professional face masking any reaction to the obvious tension between the group. "The procedure is simple and safe," she explained, leading Amanda into an examination room. "We'll take blood from the mother, which contains free fetal DNA. The results will be ready in a week." "A week?" Richard looked anxious. "Can it be faster?" "Some things can't be rushed, Richard," Eleanor replied acidly. "Something you should have learned a long time ago." As Dr. Reynolds prepared the equipment, Amanda observed the 3 Bennetts in the room. Eleanor, regal and controlled in her chair. Richard, restless and clearly uncomfortable. And Alex, a constant, comforting presence at her side. "Ready?" asked the doctor, approaching with the needle. Amanda nodded, her gaze meeting Alex's. "Ready?" As the blood flowed into the collection tube, Amanda thought about how that small vial contained not only genetic material, but also the potential to completely change the future of everyone present. Within a week, they would know the truth about the triplets' paternity. But as she watched Alex, her face tense with worry as she held his free hand, Amanda realized that some truths were already clear in her heart, regardless of what the test revealed. The week of waiting for the results of the paternity test dragged on like an eternity for everyone involved. The Beacon Hill mansion, under Eleanor Bennett's command, became a hub of frenetic activity, as if the matriarch was trying to control the general anxiety through obsessive organization. Amanda watched the changes taking place around her with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. The old bedroom on the 3rd floor was rapidly being transformed into a nursery worthy of a decorating magazine, with Eleanor personally overseeing every detail, from the choice of cribs to the exact shade of wallpaper. 3 babies need space, Eleanor often declared, while coordinating the team of decorators. And my grandchildren will have only the best. On a particularly hectic afternoon, Amanda found refuge in the mansion's back garden, a tranquil space that had become her sanctuary in recent weeks. The Boston fall painted the trees in golden hues, creating an almost magical setting. "I thought I'd find you here," Alex's voice surprised her. He was carrying 2 cups of chamomile tea, his concern for her well-being always evident in the smallest gestures. Your mother is making me dizzy with all this planning, Amanda confessed, accepting the cup with a grateful smile. Alex sat down next to her on the park bench. She's always been like that. She tries to control the uncontrollable through organization. When our father died, she renovated the whole house in a week. What was he like? Asked Amanda softly, realizing it was the first time Alex had mentioned her father. William Bennett was complicated, replied Alex after a reflective pause. A brilliant businessman, but emotionally distant. Richard was always his favorite. I saw in him the same kind of calculating ambition that he had. And you? I was more like my mother, although she's slow to admit it. Alex smiled sadly, always putting feelings before business, even when she tried to hide it. The moment was interrupted by the sound of Amanda's phone. It was Richard, again. Since the day of the test, he had called every day, always with the same question. Any news? I'm not going to answer it, Amanda decided, silencing the phone. Not now. Alex studied her face for a moment. You look different, stronger. Maybe I'm finally understanding what I want, she replied, meeting his gaze, and what I don't want anymore. The sound of heels on the stone path announced Eleanor's arrival. Ah, you're there. Dr. Reynolds called. The results are in. She wants us to go to the clinic tomorrow morning. The air suddenly seemed heavier. Amanda felt Alex's hand find hers, a silent gesture of support that said more than words could express. Has Richard been informed? Asked Alex, his voice controlled. Yes, he's catching the first flight out of Chicago, replied Eleanor. Amanda, darling, are you all right? You look pale. I'm fine, assured Amanda, although her heart was pounding. I'm just nervous. That night, Amanda couldn't sleep. From her bedroom window, she watched the lights of Boston flicker in the distance, thinking about how her life had changed so drastically in such a short time. Her fingers unconsciously traced the curve of her belly, where the triplets moved gently. A soft knock on the door surprised her. It was Eleanor, carrying a tray of tea and cookies. I figured you'd be awake, said the matriarch, placing the tray on the side table. I couldn't sleep on the eve of important moments either. Amanda accepted the offered cup, watching the older woman curiously. There was something different about her usual demeanor. You know, Eleanor began, taking a seat in a nearby armchair. When Alex was born, William was traveling on business. He missed the birth of his firstborn because a meeting in Chicago was more important. Amanda noticed the parallel Eleanor was drawing with the current situation. When Richard was born 3 years later, William was present, but he spent the whole time on the phone, closing a deal. Eleanor paused, a sad smile on her lips. Sometimes blood isn't what defines a family, Amanda. It's the choices we make, the people we choose to love and protect. Mrs. Bennett, Eleanor, dear, and let me finish. She settled into the armchair. I've been watching you and Alex. I see how he looks at you, as he always did, even when you were engaged to Richard. And I see how you look at him now. Amanda felt her cheeks blush. It's complicated. Life is complicated, darling, but sometimes the complications lead us exactly where we should be. Eleanor stood up, smoothing her silk robe. Tomorrow we'll know the truth about the paternity of the triplets, but some truths are already evident to those who know how to observe. With these enigmatic words, Eleanor left the room, leaving Amanda with her thoughts and a new perspective on family and love. The next morning, as the sun rose over Boston, 3 cars left the Beacon Hill mansion for the clinic. Eleanor in her private Bentley, Richard in an airport cab, and Amanda with Alex in their Range Rover. During the drive, Amanda broke the tense silence. Alex? Yes? Whatever happens today, she took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I want you to know that you are the father I would choose for my children. Alex had to pull over to the side of the road, his emotions finally boiling over. Amanda! His voice was choked as he turned to her. I love you, and I love these children, whether they're biologically mine or not. When they finally arrived at the clinic, where Richard and Eleanor were already waiting for them, Amanda felt surprisingly calm. Some truths, as Eleanor had said, were already evident. The DNA test would only confirm or not what her heart already knew. Dr. Reynolds was waiting for them in her office, a sealed envelope in her hands containing the answers that would change their lives forever. Dr. Reynolds' office seemed smaller that morning, as if the walls were closing in around those present. Amanda sat between Alex and Richard, with Eleanor occupying a chair near the window, all eyes fixed on the white envelope in the doctor's hands. "Before I reveal the results," began Dr. Reynolds, her professional tone masking the tension of the moment, "I'd like to remind you that, whatever this test shows, the most important thing is the well-being of Amanda in the triplets." Eleanor nodded emphatically, while Richard fidgeted restlessly in his chair. Alex remained outwardly calm, but Amanda could feel the tension in his fingers entwined with hers. "Please," said Amanda, her voice surprisingly firm, "open the envelope." Dr. Reynolds broke the seal with methodical care, removing the sheets of paper. Her eyes quickly scanned the document before looking at those present. "The results are conclusive," she declared. "The triplets' biological father is—" She paused, her eyes meeting Amanda's. "Alexander Bennett." The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda felt Alex squeeze her hand tighter, while Richard let out a strangled sound. Eleanor, surprisingly, only smiled, as if confirming something she already suspected. "That's impossible," Richard finally said, standing up abruptly. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake, Mr. Bennett," replied Dr. Reynolds calmly. "The test was carried out twice to ensure absolute accuracy. Paternity is confirmed with 99.99% certainty." Richard staggered over to the window, his back to the group. "That night," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. "The farewell party?" "Yes, Richard." Alex's voice sounded firm, although Amanda could feel the tremor in his hand. "The night you abandoned Amanda at the bar, too busy thinking about your next conquest in Chicago." Eleanor rose gracefully from her chair, crossing the room to her youngest son. "Richard, darling, I think it's time you accepted that some things just weren't meant for you." Richard turned, his blue eyes shining with something between anger and resignation. "You always knew, didn't you, Mom? That's why you weren't more shocked by the whole situation." "A mother always knows, Richard," Eleanor replied softly. "I always saw how Alex looked at Amanda, even when she was with you. And I always knew that you never truly loved her." Amanda watched the interaction between mother and son, feeling a strange peace settle in her heart. All the pieces were finally falling into place. Alex's gaze over the years, his unconditional dedication, the way he had always been there, even when he should have walked away. "I need some air," Richard declared abruptly, heading for the door. Before leaving, he stopped and looked at Amanda one last time. "I'm so sorry for everything." After Richard left, Dr. Reynolds discreetly withdrew from the room, leaving Amanda with Alex and Eleanor. "Well," said Eleanor, straightening her impeccable blazer, "I guess now we can finally start planning for the future properly." She smiled at Alex and Amanda. 3 grandchildren. What a wonderful present. "Mom," Alex began, but Eleanor held up a hand, interrupting him. "You don't have to say anything, darling. I'll wait in the car. You both need a moment." With that, she gracefully left the room, closing the doors softly behind her. Finally alone, Alex and Amanda found each other in a tight embrace, the emotions of the last few months finally boiling over. "They've always been yours," whispered Amanda against his chest. "Even before the test, deep down in my heart, I knew." Alex pulled away slightly, his hands framing her face. "Amanda, I loved you from the first moment I saw you. Seeing you with Richard was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I'd rather have you in my life as a sister-in-law than not have you at all." "And now?" she asked, her hands resting on her belly where their children were growing. "Now," Alex smiled, that smile that always made her heart race. "Now we can be the family we should always have been." "But there's so much to sort out," Amanda bit her lip, thinking of all the practical details that would need to be faced. "And we'll sort it all out together," Alex assured her, "one step at a time." When they finally left the clinic, they found Eleanor waiting patiently in the Bentley, a knowing smile on her lips. "Richard's already gone to the airport," she informed them. "I think he's finally understood that some battles aren't worth fighting." On the way back to Beacon Hill, Amanda watched the city through the car window, her hand entwined with Alex's. Boston seemed different now, brighter, more full of possibilities. "You know," Eleanor said from the front seat. "I always knew you'd be the mother of my grandchildren, Amanda. I just didn't expect it to be like this, with so many at once." Alex laughed, the rich, genuine sound filling the car. "Mom, you can't really claim that you saw this coming. Not the triplets, certainly," Eleanor smiled through the rear-view mirror. "But you and Amanda? That I saw coming years ago. Some things are just meant to be." As the car climbed the hill towards the mansion, Amanda thought about how fate had curious ways of working. What had begun as a night of consolation had turned into the start of something much bigger, much more significant. "Alex," she called softly. "Yes? Thank you for never giving up." He kissed her hand gently. "I never could. You're my destiny, Amanda. You always have been." The days that followed the revelation of the paternity test brought a different kind of calm to the Beacon Hill mansion. It was as if the universe had finally put all the pieces in place, allowing life to take its natural course. Amanda, now in her 5th month of pregnancy, was beginning to feel the movements of the triplets more frequently. One particular fall morning, as she watched the golden leaves dancing in the garden through the window of the newly decorated nursery, she felt a particularly strong kick. "Someone's agitated today," she murmured, stroking her protruding belly. "Or agitated," Eleanor's voice sounded from the doorway. "I'm still betting that at least one of them is a girl." Amanda smiled, turning to her future mother-in-law. The relationship between the two had blossomed over the last few weeks into something much deeper than the formal family connection they'd had before. "Alex is convinced there are 3 boys," Amanda replied, taking a seat in the nursing chair that Eleanor had insisted on importing from Italy. "Alex has always been too optimistic," Eleanor laughed, moving closer to arrange some teddy bears on the shelf. "But speaking of my son, he asked me to give you this." Eleanor held out a cream envelope, elegantly sealed with the Bennett coat of arms. Amanda opened it carefully, revealing a handwritten card in Alex's distinctive handwriting. "Meet me in the back garden at 7 p.m. I have a surprise for you. Love, Alex." "Do you know what it is?" asked Amanda, noticing the sparkle in Eleanor's eyes. "Darling, I learned a long time ago that some moments need to be lived, not anticipated." Eleanor smiled mysteriously. "Now, let's get ready. I have the perfect dress for the occasion." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparations. Eleanor, with her characteristic efficiency, turned the process of getting ready into an event in itself. An emerald green silk dress, chosen especially to accommodate Amanda's belly, arrived directly from an exclusive boutique in Boston. "Green has always been the Bennett color," Eleanor commented as she helped Amanda with the zipper. "It matches Alex's eyes, and probably the baby's too." At 6:55 p.m., Amanda walked down the stairs of the mansion, her heart pounding in anticipation. The autumn sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The back garden had been transformed. Hundreds of small lights had been hung from the trees, creating an almost magical atmosphere. A path of white rose petals led up to the Victorian gazebo, where Alex was waiting, impeccable in his dark suit. "You look stunning," he said as Amanda approached, her green eyes shining with restrained emotion. "Alex, what's all this?" In response, he knelt down, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Amanda felt her breathing falter. "Amanda Mason," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "For the last few years, I've loved you in silence, respecting your choices, even when it broke my heart. That night, months ago, was a gift I never expected to receive. And now, with our children on the way, I realized that fate had much bigger plans for us." He opened the box, revealing a platinum ring with an emerald surrounded by small diamonds. "This ring belonged to my grandmother. She once told me that I should only give it to the woman who makes my heart sing. And you, Amanda, have made my heart sing since the very first moment." Tears flowed freely down Amanda's face as Alex continued. "I'm not just asking you to be my wife. I'm asking to build together the family we've always dreamed of having. Would you do me the honor?" "Yes," Amanda replied without hesitation, her voice laced with emotion. "1,000 times yes." As Alex slid the ring onto her finger, applause rang out across the garden. Eleanor emerged from the shadows, followed by Mrs. Chun and a small team of staff who had helped prepare the surprise. "Finally!" exclaimed Eleanor, hugging the couple. "Now we can start planning the wedding properly." "Mom," Alex laughed, "I just proposed. And I've already wasted too much time waiting for this moment," Eleanor retorted with a smile. "Besides, we have to organize everything before my grandchildren arrive." Later that evening, after the impromptu celebrations had ended and the mansion had returned to silence, Amanda and Alex remained in the gazebo, watching the stars that were beginning to appear in the night sky. "I got a message from Richard today," Alex mentioned softly. "He's moving permanently to Chicago." Amanda nodded, feeling surprisingly at peace with the news. "He's found his way, just as we've found ours." "You're right," Alex pulled her closer, his hands resting protectively on her belly. "And speaking of paths," Dr. Reynolds called, "the next ultrasound is scheduled for next week. We'll finally be able to find out the sex of the babies." Amanda laughed. "Your mother is convinced that at least one is a girl. What about you? What do you think?" "I think that as long as they're healthy and have your green eyes, I'll be happy," she replied, turning to kiss him softly. The ring on her finger sparkled under the garden lights, the emerald reflecting the same shade as Alex's eyes, the same eyes she hoped her children would inherit. The future was unfolding in front of her, no longer frightening and uncertain as it had seemed months ago, but full of promise and possibility. "I love you," Alex whispered against her hair. "You and our little miracles." Amanda smiled, feeling the babies move, as if responding to their father's voice. Fate had curious ways of working, she thought. Sometimes you had to go through storms to find the rainbow at the end, and her rainbow had green eyes and a heart bigger than the world. Winter arrived in Boston, bringing with it the first snowflakes, turning Beacon Hill into a Christmas postcard. Amanda, now in her 8th month of pregnancy, watched the city covered in white through the panoramic window of the mansion's master bedroom, her bedroom now, since the intimate wedding held in the garden 2 months earlier. "I thought I'd find you here," Alex's voice sounded from the doorway. He was carrying a cup of hot chocolate, a ritual that had become frequent on cold mornings. "Are the little ones restless today?" Amanda smiled, stroking her impressively large belly. "As always, I think they've inherited your inexhaustible energy." Alex approached, placing the cup on the side table before hugging her from behind, his hands joining hers on her belly. One of the babies the little girl Eleanor had insisted existed, and the latest ultrasound had confirmed kicked in response to her father's touch. "Lily's awake," murmured Amanda, referring to the only girl among the triplets. The other 2 were boys, who had already been named William and James, after their paternal and maternal grandfathers. "She's always been the most active," replied Alex, gently kissing Amanda's neck. "Just like her mother." The sound of heels in the hallway announced the arrival of Eleanor, who had practically moved into the mansion in recent months, determined not to miss a moment of her grandchildren's arrival. "Oh, I'm so glad I found you too," she said, entering the room with her characteristic energy. Dr. Reynolds called. "She wants to move the cesarean up to tomorrow." Amanda felt her heart race. "Tomorrow? But there are still 2 weeks to go." "That's normal for triplet pregnancies, darling," Eleanor reassured her. "And the doctor noticed that they're already well developed. It's best not to risk it." Alex squeezed Amanda's hand lightly. "Everything is ready. The hospital room is booked, the medical team on duty. And the nursery is perfect," Eleanor added, her face lighting up with pride. 3 cribs, 3 of everything. Even the clothes are separated by color, so there's no confusion." Amanda couldn't help but smile at the level of organization. Over the last few months, she had witnessed how love could manifest itself in different ways in Alex's little daily attentions, Eleanor's obsessive dedication to the preparations, even Richard's occasional messages from Chicago, wishing his nephews all the best. "I got a letter from Richard today," Eleanor mentioned, as if reading Amanda's thoughts. "He seems at peace. He's engaged again, to a university professor." "I'm happy for him," said Amanda sincerely. "Sometimes you have to lose something to find what really matters." Alex hugged her tighter, understanding the deep meaning of her words. "How I almost lost you." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Mrs. Chan coordinated the organization of the bags for the hospital, while Eleanor oversaw every detail with her characteristic efficiency. Alex alternated between work calls, delegating responsibilities for his absence over the next few days, and moments of undivided attention to Amanda. At night, lying in their king-size bed, Amanda and Alex talked about the imminent future. "I'm nervous," she admitted, her hands intertwined with his on her belly. "3 babies at once. And we'll have double help," Alex reminded her. "Between my mother and Mrs. Chan, these babies will get more attention than British royalty." Amanda laughed, but then became serious again. "Alex, thank you." "For what?" "For everything. For loving me in silence all those years. For standing by me when everything fell apart. For being exactly the man our children need as a father." Alex propped himself up on one elbow, his green eyes shining with emotion in the dimness of the room. "Amanda, you've given me more than I ever dreamed I deserved. A family, a true love, a purpose." The next morning, as the sun rose over a snowy Boston, the Bennett family made their way to Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Reynolds was waiting for them with her team, everything meticulously prepared for the arrival of the triplets. "Ready?" asked Alex, holding Amanda's hand as she was prepared for surgery. "With you by my side? Always." At 9:47 a.m., Lily Bennett was the first to arrive into the world, her tiny fists clenched and a loud cry that made Eleanor, watching from the permitted area, cry with emotion. William followed 2 minutes later, and James completed the trio at 9:51. "3 healthy babies," announced Dr. Reynolds, her face radiant over the surgical mask, and all with the Bennett's green eyes. Hours later, in the private room decorated with flowers by Eleanor, Amanda watched her 3 miracles in the transparent cradles beside her bed. Alex didn't leave her side, alternating his attention between the babies and her. "They're perfect," he murmured, his voice laced with emotion. Eleanor, who had just returned from calling Richard to tell him the news, smiled from the sofa. "Of course they're perfect. They're Bennett." Amanda looked at her family, the 3 babies sleeping peacefully, Alex in his protective vigil, Eleanor with her unconditional love, and felt at deep peace. Fate had mapped out an unexpected but unmistakably perfect path. "Do you know that I've always loved you?" whispered Alex, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "From the very first moment." "I know," Amanda replied, smiling. "And now we have eternity to make up for lost time." Outside, the snow continued to fall on Boston, covering the city in a white blanket of renewal. Inside the hospital room, 3 new hearts were beating in tune with their parents, a living testimony to how true love always finds its way. And so, under the snowy Boston sky, the story that had begun with a night of consolation turned into a saga of love, redemption, and miracles, not one,